Chapter 41 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or the Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 41, The Fairy Godmother. The sun had gone down quite out of sight when our hero, with a happy heart but with something like a sneer on his countenance as he jerked off the wooden runners, trudged hopefully toward the tiny hut-like building known of old as the idiot's cottage. Duller eyes than his would have discerned two slight figures moving near the doorway. That gray, well-patched jacket and the dull blue skirt covered with an apron of still duller blue, that faded close-fitting cap, and those quick little feet in their great boat-like shoes, they were Gretel's, of course. He would have known them anywhere. That bright, coquettish red jacket, with its pretty skirt bordered with black, that graceful cap bobbing over the gold earrings, that dainty apron, and those snug leather shoes that seemed to have grown with the feet. Why, if the Pope of Rome had sent them to him by express, Hans could have sworn they were Annie's. The two girls were slowly pacing up and down in front of the cottage. Their arms were entwined, of course, and their heads were nodding and shaking as emphatically as if all the affairs of the kingdom were under discussion. With a joyous shout, Hans hastened toward them. "Huzzah, girls! I have found work!" That brought his mother to the cottage door. She, too, had pleasant tidings. The father was still improving. He had been sitting up nearly all day and was now sleeping, as Dame Brinker declared, just as quiet as a lamb. "It is my turn now, Hans," said Annie, drawing him aside after he had told his mother the good word from Mynheer van Holp. "Your skates are sold, and here's the money." 7 guilders! cried Hans, counting the pieces in astonishment. "Why, that is 3 times as much as I paid for them." "I cannot help that," said Annie. "If the buyer knew no better, that is not our fault." Hans looked up quickly. "Oh, Annie!" "Oh, Hans!" she mimicked, pursing her lips and trying to look desperately wicked and unprincipled. "Now, Annie, I know you would never mean that. You must return some of this money." "But I'll not do any such thing," insisted Annie. "They're sold, and that's an end of it." Then, seeing that he looked really pained, she added in a lower tone, "Will you believe me, Hans, when I say that there has been no mistake, that the person who bought your skates insisted upon paying 7 guilders for them?" "I will," he answered, and the light from his clear blue eyes seemed to settle and sparkle under Annie's lashes. Dame Brinker was delighted at the sight of so much silver, but when she learned that Hans had parted with his treasures to obtain it, she sighed and then exclaimed, "Bless thee, child, that will be a sore loss for thee." "Here, mother," said the boy, plunging his hands far into his pocket, "here is more. We shall be rich if we keep on." "Aye, indeed," she answered, eagerly reaching forth her hand. Then, lowering her voice, added, "We should be rich but for that Jan Kamphuisen. He was at the willow tree years ago, Hans, depend upon it." "Indeed, it seems likely," sighed Hans. "Well, mother, we must give up the money bravely. It is certainly gone. The father has told us all he knows. Let us think no more about it." "That's easy saying, Hans. I shall try, but it's hard, and my poor man wanting so many comforts. Bless me, how girls fly about! They were here but this instant. Where did they run to?" "They slipped behind the cottage," said Hans, "like enough to hide from us. Hist, I'll catch them for you. They both can move quicker and softer than yonder rabbit, but I'll give them a good start first." "Why, there is a rabbit, sure enough. Hold, Hans, the poor thing must have been in sore need to venture from its burrow in this bitter weather. I'll get a few crumbs for it within." So saying, the good woman bustled into the cottage. She soon came out again, but Hans had forgotten to wait, and the rabbit, after taking a cool survey of the premises, had scampered off to unknown quarters. Turning the corner of the cottage, Dame Brinker came upon the children. Hans and Gretel were standing before Annie, who was seated carelessly upon a stump. "That is as good as a picture," cried Dame Brinker, halting in admiration of the group. "Many a painting have I seen at the grand house at Heidelberg, not a whit prettier. My two are rough chubs, Annie, but you look like a fairy." "Do I?" laughed Annie, sparkling with animation. "Well then, Gretel and Hans, imagine I'm your godmother just paying you a visit. Now I'll grant you each a wish. What will you have, Master Hans?" A shade of earnestness passed over Annie's face as she looked up at him. Perhaps it was because she wished from the depths of her heart that for once she could have a fairy's power. Something whispered to Hans that, for a moment, she was more than mortal. "I wish," said he solemnly, "that I could find something I was searching for last night." Gretel laughed merrily. Dame Brinker moaned, "Shame on you, Hans!" and she went wearily into the cottage. The fairy godmother sprang up and stamped her foot 3 times. "Thou shalt have thy wish," said she. "Let them say what they will." Then, with playful solemnity, she put her hand in her apron pocket and drew forth a large glass bead. "Bury this," said she, giving it to Hans, "where I have stamped, and ere moonrise thy wish shall be granted." Gretel laughed more merrily than ever. The godmother pretended great displeasure. "Naughty child," said she, scowling terribly, "in punishment for laughing at a fairy, thy wish shall not be granted." "Ha ha ha!" cried Gretel in high glee. "Better wait till you're asked, godmother. I haven't made any wish." Annie acted her part well. Never smiling through all their merry laughter, she stalked away, the embodiment of offended dignity. "Good night, fairy," they cried again and again. "Good night, mortals," she called out at last as she sprang over a frozen ditch and ran quickly homeward. "Oh, isn't she just like flowers, so sweet and lovely?" cried Gretel, looking after her in great admiration. "And to think how many days she stays in that dark room with her grandmother. Why, brother Hans, what is the matter? What are you going to do?" "Wait and see," answered Hans as he plunged into the cottage and came out again, all in an instant, bearing the spade and icebreaker in his hands. "I'm going to bury my magic bead." Raff Brinker still slept soundly. His wife took a small block of peat from her nearly exhausted store and put it upon the embers. Then, opening the door, she called gently, "Come in, children." "Mother, mother, see here!" shouted Hans. "Holy Saint Bavon!" exclaimed the dame, springing over the doorstep. "What ails the boy?" "Come quick, mother!" he cried in great excitement, working with all his might and driving in the icebreaker at each word. "Don't you see? This is the spot, right here on the south side of the stump. Why didn't we think of it last night? The stump is the old willow tree, the one you cut down last spring because it shaded the potatoes. That little tree wasn't here when Father... Huzzah!" Dame Brinker could not speak. She dropped on her knees beside Hans just in time to see him drag forth the old stone pot. He thrust in his hand and took out a piece of brick, then another, then the stocking and the pouch, black and moldy, but filled with the long-lost treasure. Such a time, such laughing, such crying, such counting after they went into the cottage. It was a wonder that Raff did not waken. His dreams were pleasant, however, for he smiled in his sleep. Dame Brinker and her children had a fine supper, I can assure you. No need of saving the delicacies now. "We'll get Father some nice fresh things tomorrow," Dame Brinker said as she brought forth cold meat, wine, bread, and jelly, and placed them on the clean pine table. "Sit by, children, sit by." That night Annie fell asleep wondering whether it was a knife Hans had lost, and thinking how funny it would be if he should find it after all. Hans had scarcely closed his eyes before he found himself trudging along a thicket. Pots of gold were lying all around, and watches, and skates, and glittering beads were swinging from every branch. Strange to say, each tree as he approached it changed into a stump, and on the stump sat the prettiest fairy imaginable, clad in a scarlet jacket and a blue petticoat. End of chapter. Chapter 42 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or The Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 42, The Mysterious Watch. Something else than the missing guilders was brought to light on the day of the fairy godmother's visit. This was the story of the watch that for 10 long years had been so jealously guarded by Raff's faithful vrouw. Through many an hour of sore temptation she had dreaded almost to look upon it, lest she might be tempted to disobey her husband's request. It had been hard to see her children hungry, and to know that the watch, if sold, would enable the roses to bloom in their cheeks again. "But nay," she would exclaim, "Maidje Brinker is not one to forget her man's last bidding, come what may." "Take good care of this, mine vrouw," he had said as he handed it to her. That was all. No explanation followed, for the words were scarcely spoken when one of his fellow workmen rushed into the cottage crying, "Come, man, the waters are rising. You're wanted on the dikes." Raff had started at once, and that was the last Dame Brinker saw of him in his right mind. On the day when Hans was in Amsterdam looking for work, and Gretel, after performing her household labors, was wandering in search of chips, twigs, anything that could be burned, Dame Brinker with suppressed excitement had laid the watch in her husband's hand. It wasn't in reason, as she afterwards said to Hans, to wait any longer, when a word from the father would settle all. No woman living but would want to know how he came by that watch. Raff Brinker turned the bright polished thing over and over in his hand. Then he examined the bit of smoothly ironed black ribbon fastened to it. He seemed hardly to recognize it. At last he said, "Ah, I remember this. Why, you've been rubbing it, vrouw, till it shines like a new gilder." "Aye," said Dame Brinker, nodding her head complacently. Raff looked at it again. "Poor boy," he murmured, then fell into a brown study. This was too much for the dame. "Poor boy!" she echoed, somewhat tartly. "What do you think I'm standing here for, Raff Brinker, and my spinning awaiting, if not to hear more than that?" "I told ye all long since," said Raff positively as he looked up in surprise. "Indeed, and you never did," retorted the vrouw. "Well, if not, since it's no affair of ours, we'll say no more about it," said Raff, shaking his head sadly. "Like enough, while I've been dead on the earth all this time, the poor boy's died and been in heaven. He looked near enough to it, poor lad." "Raff Brinker, if you're going to treat me this way, and I nursing you and bearing with you since I was 22 years old, it's a shame, aye, and a disgrace," cried the vrouw, growing quite red and scant of breath. Raff's voice was feeble yet. "Treat you what way, Meitje?" "What way?" said Dame Brinker, mimicking his voice and manner. "What way? Why, just as every woman in the world is treated after she's stood by a man through the worst, like a—" "Meitje?" Raff was leaning forward with outstretched arms. His eyes were full of tears. In an instant Dame Brinker was at his feet, clasping his hands in hers. "Oh, what have I done? Made my good man cry, and he not back with me 4 days! Look up, Raff." "Nay, Raff, my own boy, I'm sorry I hurt thee. It's hard not to be told about the watch after waiting 10 years to know, but I'll ask thee no more, Raff. Here, we'll put the thing away that's made the first trouble between us, after God just gave thee back to me." "I was a fool to cry, Meitje," he said, kissing her, "and it's no more than right that ye should know the truth. But it seemed as if it might be telling the secrets of the dead to talk about the matter." "Is the man, the lad, thou wert talking of dead, think thee?" asked the vrouw, hiding the watch in her hand, but seating herself expectantly on the end of his long footbench. "It's hard telling," he answered. "Was he so sick, Raff?" "No, not sick, I may say, but troubled, vrouw, very troubled." "Had he done wrong, think ye?" she asked, lowering her voice. Raff nodded. "Murder?" whispered the wife, not daring to look up. "He said it was like to that, indeed." "Oh, Raff, you frighten me. Tell me more. You speak so strange, and you tremble. I must know all." "If I tremble, mine vrouw, it must be from the fever. There is no guilt on my soul, thank God." "Take a sip of this wine, Raff. There. Now you are better. It was like to a crime you were saying." "Aye, Meitje, like to murder. That he told me himself. But I'll never believe it. A likely lad, fresh and honest looking as our own youngster, but with something not so bold and straight about him." "Aye, I know," said the dame gently, fearing to interrupt the story. "He came upon me quite suddenly," continued Raff. "I had never seen his face before, the palest, frightenedest face that ever was. He caught me by the arm. 'You look like an honest man,' says he." "Aye, he was right in that," interrupted the dame emphatically. Raff looked somewhat bewildered. "Where was I, mine vrouw?" "The lad took hold of your arm, Raff," she said, gazing at him anxiously. "Aye, so. The words come awkward to me, and everything is like a dream, you see." "Stud, what wonder, poor man!" She sighed, stroking his hand. "If ye had not had enough for a dozen, the wood would never have come to ye again. Well, the lad caught me by the arm and said ye looked honest. Well he might. What then? Was it noontime?" "Nay, before daylight, long before early chimes." "It was the same day you were hurt," said the dame. "I know it seemed that you went to your work in the middle of the night. You left off where he caught your arm, Raff." "Yes," resumed her husband, "and I can see his face this minute, so white and wild looking. 'Take me down this river away,' says he. I was working then, you remember, far down on the line across from Amsterdam. I told him I was no boatman. 'It's an affair of life and death,' says he. 'Take me on a few miles. Yonder skiff is not locked, but it may be a poor man's boat, and I'd be loath to rob him.' The words might differ some, vrouw, for it's all like a dream. Well, I took him down, it might be 6 or 8 miles, and then he said he could run the rest of the way on shore. I was in haste to get the boat back. Before he jumped out, he says, sobbing like, 'I can trust you. I've done a thing. God knows I never intended it, but the man is dead. I must fly from Holland."
"What was it? Did he say, Raff? Had he been shooting at a comrade, as they do down at the university at Göttingen?"
"I can't recall that. Mayhap he told me, but it's all like a dream. I said it wasn't for me, a good Hollander, to cheat the laws of my country by helping him off that way. But he kept saying, 'God knows I am innocent.' And he looked at me in the starlight as fair now and clear-eyed as our little Hans might, and I just pulled away faster."
"It must have been Jan Kamphuisen's boat," remarked Dame Brinker dryly. "None other would have left his oars out that careless."
"Aye, it was Jan's boat, sure enough. The man will be coming in to see me Sunday, likely, if he's heard, and young Hoosvliet too. Where was I?"
"Where were you? Why, not very far, forsooth. The lad hadn't yet given you the watch. Alack, I misgive whether he came by it honestly."
"Why, vrouw," exclaimed Raff Brinker in an injured tone, "he was dressed soft and fine as the Prince himself. The watch was his own, clear enough."
"How came he to give it up?" asked the dame, looking uneasily at the fire, for it needed another block of peat.
"I told ye just now," he answered with a puzzled air.
"Tell me again," said Dame Brinker, wisely warding off another digression.
"Well, just before jumping from the boat, he says, handing me the watch, 'I'm flying from my country, as I never thought I could. I'll trust you, because you look honest. Will you take this to my father, not today, but in a week, and tell him his unhappy boy sent it, and tell him if ever the time comes that he wants me to come back to him, I'll brave everything and come. Tell him to send a letter to... There, the rest is all gone from me. I can't remember where the letter was to go. Poor lad, resumed Raff, sorrowfully, taking the watch from his vrouw's lap as he spoke. And it's never been sent to his father to this day."
"I'll take it, Raff, never fear. The moment Gretel gets back. She will be in soon. What was the father's name, did you say? Where were you to find him?"
"Alack," answered Raff, speaking very slowly, "it's all slipped me. I can see the lad's face, and his great eyes, just as plain, and I remember his opening the watch and snatching something from it and kissing it. But no more. All the rest whirls past me. There's a sound like rushing water comes over me when I try to think."
"Aye, that's plain to see, Raff, but I've had the same feeling after a fever. You're tired now. I must get ye straight on the bed again. Where is the child, I wonder?" Dame Brinker opened the door and called, "Gretel! Gretel!"
"Stand aside, vrouw," said Raff feebly, as he leaned forward and endeavored to look out upon the bare landscape. "I've half a mind to stand beyond the door, just once."
"Nay, nay," she laughed. "I'll tell the meester how ye tease and fidget and bother to be let out in the air, and if he says it, I'll bundle ye warm tomorrow and give ye a turn on your feet. But I'm freezing you with this door open. I declare if there isn't Gretel with her apron full, skating on the canal like wild. Why, man," she continued, almost in a scream as she slammed the door, "thou'rt walking to the bed without my touching thee. Thou'lt fall." The dame's "thee" proved her mingled fear and delight even more than the rush which she made toward her husband. Soon he was comfortably settled under the new cover, declaring, as his vrouw tucked him in snug and warm, that it was the last daylight that should see him abed. "I can hope it myself," laughed Dame Brinker, "now you have been frisking about at that rate." As Raff closed his eyes, the dame hastened to revive her fire, or rather to dull it, for Dutch Pete is like a Dutchman,
slow to kindle, but very good at a blaze once started. Then, putting her neglected spinning wheel away, she drew forth her knitting from some invisible pocket and seated herself by the bedside. "If you could remember the man's name, Raff," she began cautiously, "I might take the watch to him while you're sleeping. Gretel can't but be in soon." Raff tried to think, but in vain. "Could it be Boomphoffen?" suggested the dame. "I've heard how they've had 2 sons turn out bad, Gerard and Lambert." "It might be," said Raff. "Look if there's letters on the watch. That'll guide us some." "Bless thee, man!" cried the happy dame, eagerly lifting the watch. "Why, thou'rt sharper than ever. Sure enough, here's letters, L.J.B. That's Lambert Boomphoffen, you may depend. What the J is for, I can't say, but they used to be grand kind of people, high-feathered as fancy fowl, just the kind to give their children all double names, which isn't Scripture, anyway." "I don't know about that, vrouw. Seems to me there's long mixed names in the Holy Book, hard enough to make out. But you've got the right guess at a jump. It was your way always," said Raff, closing his eyes. "Take the watch to Boompkinks and try. Aye, take it there." "Take it there, man! Why, the whole brood of them's been gone to America these 4 years. But go to sleep, Raff. You look pale and out of strength. It'll all come to you. What's best to do in the morning? So, Mistress Gretel, here you are at last." Before Raff awoke that evening, the fairy godmother, as we know, had been in the cottage. The guilders were once more safely locked in the big chest, and Dame Brinker and the children were faring sumptuously on meat and white bread and wine. So the mother, in the joy of her heart, told them the story of the watch as far as she deemed it prudent to divulge it. It was no more than fair, she thought, that the poor things should know, after keeping the secret so safe ever since they had been old enough to know anything. End of chapter. Chapter 43 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or the Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 43. A Discovery. The next sun brought a busy day to the Brinkers. In the first place, the news of the 1,000 guilders had, of course, to be told to the father. Such tidings as that surely could not harm him. Then, while Gretel was diligently obeying her mother's injunction to clean the place fresh as a new brewing, Hans and the dame sallied forth to revel in the purchasing of peat and provisions. Hans was careless and contented. The dame was filled with delightful anxieties caused by the unreasonable demands of 10,000 guilders' worth of new wants that had sprung up like mushrooms in a single night. The happy woman talked so largely to Hans on their way to Amsterdam, and brought back such little bundles after all, that he scratched his bewildered head as he leaned against the chimney-piece, wondering whether "bigger the pouch, tighter the string" was in Jacob Cats, and therefore true, or whether he had dreamed it when he lay in a fever. "What thinking on, Big Eyes?" chirruped his mother, half reading his thoughts as she bustled about, preparing the dinner. "What thinking on? Why, Raff, would you believe it? The child thought to carry half Amsterdam back on his head. Bless us! He would have brought us as much coffee as would have filled this fire-pot. No, no, my lad, says I, no time for leaks when the ship is rich laden. And then how he stared, aye, just as he stares this minute. Hoot, lad, fly around a mite. You'll grow to the chimney place with your staring and wondering.
Now, Raff, here's your chair at the head of the table, where it should be, for there's a man to the house now. I'd say it to the king's face. Aye, that's the way. Lean on Hans. There's a strong staff for you. Growing like a weed, too, and it seems only yesterday since he was toddling. Sit by, my man, sit by.
Can you call to mind, Fro, said Raff, settling himself cautiously in the big chair, the wonderful music box that cheered your working in the big house at Heidelberg?
Aye, that I can, answered the dame. 3 turns of a brass key, and the witchy thing would send the music fairly running up and down one's back. I remember it well. But, Raff, growing solemn in an instant, you would never throw our guilders away for a thing like that.
No, not I, Fro, for the good Lord has already given me a music box without pay.
All 3 cast quick, frightened glances at one another and at Raff. Were his wits on the wing again?
Aye, and a music box that 50 pouchful would not buy from me, insisted Raff, and it's set going by the turn of a mop handle, and it slips and glides around the room, everywhere in a flash, carrying the music about till you'd swear the birds were back again.
Holy Saint Bavon! Screeched the dame. What's in the man?
Comfort and joy, Fro, that's what's in him. Ask Gretel. Ask my little music box, Gretel, if your man has lacked comfort and joy this day.
Not he, mother, laughed Gretel. He's been my music box, too. We sang together half the time you were gone.
Aye, so, said the dame, greatly relieved.
Now, Hans, you'll never get through with a piece like that. But never mind, chick, thou'st had a long fasting. Here, Gretel, take another slice of the sausage. It'll put blood in your cheeks. Oh, mother, laughed Gretel, eagerly holding forth her platter. Blood doesn't grow in girls' cheeks. You mean roses. Isn't it roses, Hans?
While Hans was hastily swallowing a mammoth mouthful in order to give a suitable reply to this poetic appeal, Dame Brinker settled the matter with a quick,
well, roses or blood, it's all one to me, so the red finds its way on your sunny face. It's enough for mother to get pale and weary-looking without...
Hoot, Fro, spoke up Raff hastily. Thou'rt fresher and rosier this minute than both our chicks put together.
This remark, though not bearing very strong testimony to the clearness of Raff's newly awakened intellect, nevertheless afforded the dame immense satisfaction. The meal accordingly went on in the most delightful manner. After dinner the affair of the watch was talked over and the mysterious initials duly discussed. Hans had just pushed back his stool, intending to start at once for Mynheer van Holp's, and his mother had risen to put the watch away in its old hiding-place, when they heard the sound of wheels upon the frozen ground. Someone knocked at the door, opening it at the same time. Come in, stammered Dame Brinker, hastily trying to hide the watch in her bosom. Oh, it is you, mynheer. Good day. The father is nearly well, as you see. It's a poor place to greet you in, mynheer, and the dinner not cleared away. Dr. Boekman scarcely noticed the dame's apology. He was evidently in haste.
Ahem, he exclaimed. Not needed here, I perceive. The patient is mending fast.
Well he may, mynheer, cried the dame, for only last night we found 1,000 guilders that's been lost to us these 10 years. Dr. Boekman opened his eyes.
Yes, mynheer, said Raff. I bid the vrouw tell you, though it's to be held a secret among us, for I see you can keep your lips closed as well as any man.
The doctor scowled. He never liked personal remarks.
Now, mynheer, continued Raff, you can take your rightful pay. God knows you have earned it, if bringing such a poor tool back to the world and his family can be called a service. Tell the vrouw what's to pay, mynheer. She will hand out the sum right willingly.
Tut, tut, said the doctor kindly.
Say nothing about money. I can find plenty of such pay any time, but gratitude comes seldom. That boy's thank you," he added, nodding sideways toward Hans, "was pay enough for me."
"Like enough you have a boy of your own," said Dame Brinker, quite delighted to see the great man becoming so sociable. Dr. Boekman's good nature vanished at once. He gave a growl, at least it seemed so to Gretel, but made no actual reply. "Do not think the vrouw meddlesome, mynheer," said Raff. "She has been sore touched of late about a lad whose folks have gone away, none knows where, and I had a message for them from the young gentleman." "The name was Boomphoffen," said the dame eagerly. "Do you know aught of the family, mynheer?"
The doctor's reply was brief and gruff. "Yes, a troublesome set. They went long since to America."
"It might be, Raff," persisted Dame Brinker timidly, "that the meester knows somebody in that country, though I'm told they are mostly savages over there. If he could get the watch to the Boomphoffens with the poor lad's message, it would be a most blessed thing."
"Tut, vrouw, why pester the good meester, and dying men and women wanting him everywhere? How do you know you have the true name?"
"I'm sure of it," she replied. "They had a son Lambert, and there's an L for Lambert, and a B for Boomphoffen, on the back, though, to be sure, there's an odd J, too, but the meester can look for himself." So saying, she drew forth the watch.
"L.J.B.!"
cried Dr. Boekman, springing toward her.
Why attempt to describe the scene that followed? I need only say that the lad's message was delivered to his father at last, delivered while the great surgeon was sobbing like a little child.
"Laurens, my Laurens!"
he cried, gazing with yearning eyes at the watch as he held it tenderly in his palm.
"Ah, if I had but known sooner! Laurens a homeless wanderer, great heaven! He may be suffering, dying at this moment. Think, man, where is he? Where did my boy say that the letter must be sent?"
Raff shook his head sadly. "Think," implored the doctor. Surely the memory so lately awakened through his aid could not refuse to serve him in a moment like this. "It is all gone, mynheer," sighed Raff. Hans, forgetting distinctions of rank and station, forgetting everything but that his good friend was in trouble, threw his arms around the doctor's neck.
"I can find your son, mynheer. If alive, he is somewhere. The earth is not so very large. I will devote every day of my life to the search. Mother can spare me now. You are rich, mynheer. Send me where you will." Gretel began to cry. It was right for Hans to go, but how could they ever live without him? Dr. Boekman made no reply, neither did he push Hans away. His eyes were fixed anxiously upon Raff Brinker. Suddenly he lifted the watch and with trembling eagerness attempted to open it. Its stiffened spring yielded at last. The case flew open, disclosing a watch paper in the back bearing a group of blue forget-me-nots. Raff, seeing a shade of intense disappointment pass over the doctor's face, hastened to say, "There was something else in it, mynheer, but the young gentleman tore it out before he handed it to me. I saw him kiss it as he put it away."
"It was his mother's picture," moaned the doctor. "She died when he was 10 years old. Thank God, the boy had not forgotten. Both dead. It is impossible!" he cried, starting up. "My boy is alive. You shall hear his story. Laurens acted as my assistant. By mistake, he portioned out the wrong medicine for one of my patients, a deadly poison, but it was never administered, for I discovered the error in time. The man died that day. I was detained with other bad cases until the next evening. When I reached home, my boy was gone. Poor Laurens!" sobbed the doctor, breaking down completely. never to hear from me through all these years, his message disregarded. Oh, what he must have suffered!"
Dame Brinker ventured to speak. Anything was better than to see the meester cry. "It is a mercy to know the young gentleman was innocent. Ah, how he fretted, telling you, Raff, that his crime was like unto murder. It was sending the wrong physic that he meant. Crime indeed! Why, our own Gretel might have done that. Like enough the poor young gentleman heard that the man was dead. That's why he ran, mynheer. He said, you know, Raff, that he never could come back to Holland again unless—" She hesitated. "Ah, your honor, 10 years is a dreary time to be waiting to hear from—"
"Sh, vrouw," said Raff sharply. "Waiting to hear," the doctor groaned, "and I, like a fool, sitting stubbornly at home thinking that he had abandoned me. I never dreamed, Brinker, that the boy had discovered the mistake. I believed it was youthful folly, ingratitude, love of adventure that sent him away. My poor, poor Laurens."
"But you know all now, mynheer," whispered Hans. "You know he was innocent of wrong, that he loved you and his dead mother. We will find him. You shall see him again, dear meester."
"God bless you," said Dr. Boekman, seizing the boy's hand. "It may be as you say. I shall try. I shall try. And, Brinker, if ever the faintest gleam of recollection concerning him should come to you, you will send me word at once."
"Indeed we will," cried all but Hans, whose silent promise would have satisfied the doctor even had the others not spoken.
"Your boy's eyes," he said, turning to Dame Brinker, "are strangely like my son's. The first time I met him, it seemed that Laurens himself was looking at me."
"Aye, mynheer," replied the mother proudly. "I have marked that you were much drawn to the child."
For a few moments the meester seemed lost in thought. Then, arousing himself, he spoke in a new voice. "Forgive me, Raff Brinker, for this tumult. Do not feel distressed on my account. I leave your house today a happier man than I have been for many a long year. Shall I take the watch?"
"Certainly you must, mynheer. It was your son's wish."
"Even so," responded the doctor, regarding his treasure with a queer frown, for his face could not throw off its bad habits in an hour. "Even so. And now I must be gone. No medicine is needed by my patient, only peace and cheerfulness, and both are here in plenty. Heaven bless you, my good friends. I shall ever be grateful to you."
"May Heaven bless you too, mynheer, and may you soon find the young gentleman," said Dame Brinker earnestly, after hurriedly wiping her eyes upon the corner of her apron.
Raff uttered a hearty "Amen," and Gretel threw such a wistful, eager glance at the doctor that he patted her head as he turned to leave the cottage. Hans went out also.
"When I can serve you, mynheer, I am ready."
"Very well, boy," replied Dr. Boekman with peculiar mildness. "Tell them within to say nothing of what has just happened. Meantime, Hans, when you are with your father, watch his mood. You have tact. At any moment he may suddenly be able to tell us more."
"Trust me for that, mynheer."
"Good day, my boy," cried the doctor as he sprang into his stately coach.
"Aha!" thought Hans as it rolled away. "The meester has more life in him than I thought." End of chapter.
Chapter 44 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or the Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 44. The Race. The 20th of December came at last, bringing with it the perfection of winter weather. All over the level landscape lay the warm sunlight. It tried its power on lake, canal, and river, but the ice flashed defiance and showed no sign of melting. The very weathercocks stood still to enjoy the sight. This gave the windmills a holiday. Nearly all the past week they had been whirling briskly. Now, being rather out of breath, they rocked lazily in the clear, still air. Catch a windmill working when the weathercocks have nothing to do. There was an end to grinding, crushing, and sawing for that day. It was a good thing for the millers near Broek. Long before noon they concluded to take in their sails and go to the race. Everybody would be there. Already the north side of the frozen eye was bordered with eager spectators. The news of the great skating match had traveled far and wide. Men, women, and children in holiday attire were flocking toward the spot. Some wore furs and wintry cloaks or shawls, but many, consulting their feelings rather than the almanac, were dressed as for an October day. The site selected for the race was a faultless plain of ice near Amsterdam, on that great arm of the Zuider Zee, which Dutchmen, of course, must call the Eye. The townspeople turned out in large numbers. Strangers to the city deemed it a fine chance to see what was to be seen. Many a peasant from the northward had wisely chosen the 20th as the day for the next city trading. It seemed that everybody, young and old, who had wheels, skates, or feet at command, had hastened to the scene. There were the gentry in their coaches, dressed like Parisians, fresh from the boulevards. Amsterdam children in charity uniforms. Girls from the Roman Catholic orphan house in sable gowns and white headbands. Boys from the burgher asylum with their black tights and short-skirted harlequin coats. This is not said in derision. Both the boys and girls of this institution wear garments quartered in red and black alternately. By making the dress thus conspicuous, the children are, in a measure, deterred from wrongdoing while going about the city. The Burgher Orphan Asylum affords a comfortable home to several hundred boys and girls. Holland is famous for its charitable institutions. There were old-fashioned gentlemen in cocked hats and velvet knee breeches, old-fashioned ladies, too, in stiff quilted skirts and bodices of dazzling brocade. These were accompanied by servants bearing footstoves and cloaks. There were the peasant folk arrayed in every possible Dutch costume, shy young rustics in brazen buckles, simple village maidens concealing their flaxen hair under fillets of gold, women whose long, narrow aprons were stiff with embroidery, women with short corkscrew curls hanging over their foreheads, women with shaved heads and close-fitting caps, and women in striped skirts and windmill bonnets. Men in leather, in homespun, in velvet, and in broadcloth. Burghers in model European attire, and burghers in short jackets, wide trousers, and steeple-crowned hats. There were beautiful Friesland girls in wooden shoes and coarse petticoats, with solid gold crescents encircling their heads, finished at each temple with a golden rosette and hung with lace a century old. Some wore necklaces, pendants, and earrings of the purest gold. Many were content with gilt or even with brass, but it is not an uncommon thing for a Friesland woman to have all the family treasure in her headgear. More than one rustic lass displayed the value of 2,000 guilders upon her head that day. Scattered throughout the crowd were peasants from the island or marken, with sabots, black stockings, and the widest of breeches. Also women from Marken with short blue petticoats and black jackets, gaily figured in front. They wore red sleeves, white aprons, and a cap like a bishop's mitre over their golden hair. The children often were as quaint and odd-looking as their elders. In short, 1/3 of the crowd seemed to have stepped bodily from a collection of Dutch paintings. Everywhere could be seen tall women and stumpy men, lively-faced girls, and youths whose expression never changed from sunrise to sunset. There seemed to be at least one specimen from every known town in Holland. There were Utrecht water-bearers, Gouda cheesemakers, Delft pottery-men, Schiedam distillers, Amsterdam diamond-cutters, Rotterdam merchants, dried-up herring-packers, and 2 sleepy-eyed shepherds from Texel. Every man of them had his pipe and tobacco pouch. Some carried what might be called the smoker's complete outfit: a pipe, tobacco, a pricker with which to clean the tube, a silver net for protecting the bowl, and a box of the strongest brimstone matches. A true Dutchman, you must remember, is rarely without his pipe on any possible occasion. He may for a moment neglect to breathe, but when the pipe is forgotten he must be dying indeed. There were no such sad cases here. Wreaths of smoke were rising from every possible quarter. The more fantastic the smoke wreath, the more placid and solemn the smoker. Look at those boys and girls on stilts. That is a good idea. They can see over the heads of the tallest. It is strange to see those little bodies high in the air, carried about on mysterious legs. They have such a resolute look on their round faces. What wonder that nervous old gentlemen with tender feet wince and tremble while the long-legged little monsters stride past them. You will read in certain books that the Dutch are a quiet people. So they are generally. But listen. Did you ever hear such a din? All made up of human voices. No, the horses are helping somewhat, and the fiddles are squeaking pitifully. How it must pain fiddles to be tuned. But the mass of the sound comes from the great vox humana that belongs to a crowd. That queer little dwarf going about with a heavy basket, winding in and out among the people, helps not a little. You can hear his shrill cry above all the other sounds, "Pijpen en tabak! Pijpen en tabak!" Another, his big brother, though evidently some years younger, is selling doughnuts and bonbons. He is calling on all pretty children far and near to come quickly, or the cakes will be gone. You know quite a number among the spectators. High up in yonder pavilion, erected upon the border of the ice, are some persons whom you have seen very lately. In the center is Madame van Gleck. It is her birthday, you remember. She has the post of honor. There is Mynheer van Gleck, whose meerschaum has not really grown fast to his lips, it only appears so. There are grandfather and grandmother, whom you met at the St. Nicholas fete. All the children are with them. It is so mild they have brought even the baby. The poor little creature is swathed very much after the manner of an Egyptian mummy, but it can crow with delight, and, when the band is playing, open and shut its animated mittens in perfect time to the music. Grandfather, with his pipe and spectacles and fur cap, makes quite a picture as he holds baby upon his knee. Perched high upon their canopied platforms, the party can see all that is going on. No wonder the ladies look complacently at the glassy ice. With a stove for a footstool, one might sit cozily beside the North Pole. There is a gentleman with them who somewhat resembles St. Nicholas as he appeared to the young Van Glecks on the 5th of December, but the saint had a flowing white beard, and this face is as smooth as a pippin. His saintship was larger around the body, too, and, between ourselves, he had a pair of thimbles in his mouth, which this gentleman certainly has not. It cannot be St. Nicholas, after all. Near by, in the next pavilion, sit the Van Holps with their son and daughter, the Van Gents, from the Hague. Peter's sister is not one to forget her promises. She has brought bouquets of exquisite hothouse flowers for the winners. These pavilions, and there are others besides, have all been erected since daylight. That semicircular one, containing Mynheer Korbes's family, is very pretty, and proves that the Hollanders are quite skilled at tent-making, but I like the Van Glecks best, the center one, striped red and white and hung with evergreens. The one with the blue flags contains the musicians. Those pagoda-like affairs, decked with sea-shells and streamers of every possible hue, are the judges' stands, and those columns and flagstaffs upon the ice mark the limit of the race-course. The two white columns twined with green, connected at the top by that long floating strip of drapery, form the starting point. Those flagstaffs, half a mile off, stand at each end of the boundary line, which is cut sufficiently deep to be distinct to the skaters, though not deep enough to trip them when they turn to come back to the starting point. The air is so clear that it seems scarcely possible that the columns and the flagstaffs are so far apart. Of course, the judges' stands are but little nearer together. Half a mile on the ice, when the atmosphere is like this, is but a short distance after all, especially when fenced with a living chain of spectators. The music has commenced. How melody seems to enjoy itself in the open air! The fiddles have forgotten their agony, and everything is harmonious. Until you look at the blue tent, it seems that the music springs from the sunshine. It is so boundless, so joyous. Only when you see the staid-faced musicians do you realize the truth. Where are the racers? All assembled together near the white columns. It is a beautiful sight. 40 boys and girls in picturesque attire darting with electric swiftness in and out among each other, or sailing in pairs and triplets, beckoning, chatting, whispering in the fullness of youthful glee. A few careful ones are soberly tightening their straps. Others, halting on one leg, with flushed, eager faces, suddenly cross the suspected skate over their knee, give it an examining shake, and dart off again. One and all are possessed with the spirit of motion. They cannot stand still. Their skates are a part of them, and every runner seems bewitched. Holland is the place for skaters, after all. Where else can nearly every boy and girl perform feats on the ice that would attract a crowd if seen in Central Park? Look at Ben. He is really astonishing the natives. No easy thing to do in the Netherlands. Save your strength, Ben. You will need it soon. Now other boys are trying. Ben is surpassed already. Such jumping, such poising, such spinning, such India rubber exploits generally. That boy with a red cap is the lion now. His back is a watch spring. His body is cork. No, it is iron, or it would snap at that. He's a bird, a top, a rabbit, a corkscrew, a sprite, a flesh ball, all in an instant. When you think he's erect, he is down. When you think he is down, he is up. He drops his glove on the ice and turns a somersault as he picks it up. Without stopping, he snatches the cap from Jacob Poot's astonished head and claps it back again, hindside before. Lookers-on hurrah and laugh. Foolish boy, it is Arctic weather under your feet, but more than temperate overhead. Big drops already are rolling down your forehead. Superb skater as you are, you may lose the race. A French traveler, standing with a notebook in his hand, sees our English friend Ben buy a doughnut of the dwarf's brother and eat it. Thereupon he writes in his notebook that the Dutch take enormous mouthfuls and universally are fond of potatoes boiled in molasses. There are some familiar faces near the white columns. Lambert, Ludwig, Peter, and Karl are all there, cool and in good skating order. Hans is not far off. Evidently he is going to join in the race, for his skates are on, the very pair that he sold for 7 guilders. He had soon suspected that his fairy godmother was the mysterious friend who bought them. This settled, he had boldly charged her with the deed, and she, knowing well that all her little savings had been spent in the purchase, had not had the face to deny it. Through the fairy godmother, too, he had been rendered amply able to buy them back again. Therefore Hans is to be in the race. Karl is more indignant than ever about it, but as 3 other peasant boys have entered, Hans is not alone. 20 boys and 20 girls. The latter, by this time, are standing in front, braced for the start, for they are to have the first run. Hilda, Richie, and Katrinka are among them. 2 or 3 bend hastily to give a last pull at their skate straps. It is pretty to see them stamp, to be sure that all is firm. Hilda is speaking pleasantly to a graceful little creature in a red jacket and a new brown petticoat. Why, it is Gretel! What a difference those pretty shoes make, and the skirt and the new cap. Annie Bouman is there too. Even Janzoon Kolp's sister has been admitted, but Janzoon himself has been voted out by the directors because he killed the stork, and only last summer was caught in the act of robbing a bird's nest, a legal offense in Holland. This Janzoon Kolp, you see, was... There, I cannot tell the story just now. The race is about to commence. 20 girls are formed in a line. The music has ceased. A man, whom we shall call the crier, stands between the columns, and the first judges stand. He reads the rules in a loud voice. The girls and boys are to race in turn until one girl and one boy have beaten twice. They are to start in a line from the united columns, skate to the flagstaff line, turn, and then come back to the starting point, thus making a mile at each run. A flag is waved from the judges' stand. Madame van Gleck rises in her pavilion. She leans forward with a white handkerchief in her hand. When she drops it, a bugler is to give the signal for them to start. The handkerchief is fluttering to the ground. Hark! They are off. No, back again. Their line was not true in passing the judges' stand. The signal is repeated. Off again. No mistake this time. Whew! How fast they go! The multitude is quiet for an instant, absorbed in eager, breathless watching. Cheers spring up along the line of spectators. Huzzah! 5 girls are ahead. Who comes flying back from the boundary mark? We cannot tell. Something red, that is all. There is a blue spot flitting near it, and a dash of yellow nearer still. Spectators at this end of the line strain their eyes and wish they had taken their posts nearer the flagstaff. The wave of cheers is coming back again. Now we can see. Katrinka is ahead. She passes the Van Holp pavilion. The next is Madame van Gleck's. That leaning figure gazing from it is a magnet. Hilda shoots past Katrinka, waving her hand to her mother as she passes. 2 others are close now, whizzing on like arrows. What is that flash of red and gray? Hurrah! It is Gretel! She too waves her hand, but toward no gay pavilion. The crowd is cheering, but she hears only her father's voice. Well done, little Gretel! Soon Katrinka, with a quick, merry laugh, shoots past Hilda. The girl in yellow is gaining now. She passes them all except Gretel. The judges lean forward without seeming to lift their eyes from their watches. Cheer after cheer fills the air. Their very columns seem rocking. Gretel has passed them. She has won. Gretel Brinker, 1 mile, shouts the crier. The judges nod. They write something upon a tablet which each holds in his hand. While the girls are resting, some crowding eagerly around our frightened little Gretel, some standing aside in high disdain, the boys form a line. Mynheer van Gleck drops the handkerchief this time. The buglers give a vigorous blast. The boys have started. Halfway already! Did you ever see the like? 300 legs flashing by in an instant. But there are only 20 boys. No matter, there were hundreds of legs, I am sure. Where are they now? There is such a noise, one gets bewildered. What are the people laughing at? Oh, at that fat boy in the rear. See him go? See him? He'll be down in an instant. No, he won't. I wonder if he knows he is all alone. The other boys are nearly at the boundary line. Yes, he knows it. He stops. He wipes his hot face. He takes off his cap and looks about him. Better to give up with a good grace. He has made 100 friends by that hearty, astonished laugh. Good Jacob Poot! The fine fellow is already among the spectators, gazing as eagerly as the rest. A cloud of feathery ice flies from the heels of the skaters as they bring to and turn at the flagstaffs. Something black is coming now. One of the boys. It is all we know. He has touched the vox humana stop of the crowd. It fairly roars. Now they come nearer. We can see the red cap. There's Ben. There's Peter. There's Hans. Hans is ahead. Young Madame van Gend almost crushes the flowers in her hand. She has been quite sure that Peter would be first. Carl Schummel is next, then Ben, and the youth with the red cap. A tall figure darts from among them. He passes the red cap, he passes Ben, then Carl. Now it is an even race between him and Hans. Madame van Gend catches her breath. It is Peter! He is ahead. Hans shoots past him. Hilda's eyes fill with tears. Peter must beat. Annie's eyes flash proudly. Gretel gazes with clasped hands. 4 strokes more will take her brother to the columns. He is there. Yes, but so was young Schummel just a second before. At the last second Carl, gathering his powers, had whizzed between them and passed the goal. "Carl Schummel, 1 mile!" shouts the crier. Soon Madame van Gleck rises again. The falling handkerchief starts the bugle, and the bugle, using its voice as a bowstring, shoots off 20 girls like so many arrows. It is a beautiful sight, but one has not long to look. Before we can fairly distinguish them, they are far in the distance. This time they are close upon one another. It is hard to say as they come speeding back from the flagstaff which will reach the columns first. There are new faces among the foremost, eager, glowing faces, unnoticed before. Katrinka is there, and Hilda, but Gretel and Rychie are in the rear. Gretel is wavering, but when Rychie passes her, she starts forward afresh. Now they are nearly beside Katrinka. Hilda is still in advance. She is almost home. She has not faltered since that bugle note sent her flying. Like an arrow still, she is speeding toward the goal. Cheer after cheer rises in the air. Peter is silent, but his eyes shine like stars. Huzzah! Huzzah! The crier's voice is heard again. "Hilda van Gleck, 1 mile!" A loud murmur of approval runs through the crowd, catching the music in its course, till all seems one sound, with a glad rhythmic throbbing in its depths. When the flag waves, all is still. Once more the bugle blows a terrific blast. It sends off the boys like chaff before the wind, dark chaff, I admit, and in big pieces. It is whisked around at the flagstaff, driven faster yet by the cheers and shouts along the line. We begin to see what is coming. There are 3 boys in advance this time, and all abreast. Hans, Peter, and Lambert. Carl soon breaks the ranks, rushing through with a whiff. Fly, Hans! Fly, Peter! Don't let Carl beat again! Carl the bitter, Carl the insolent. Van Monen is flagging, but you are strong as ever. Hans and Peter, Peter and Hans, which is foremost? We love them both. We scarcely care which is the fleeter. Hilda, Annie, and Gretel, seated upon the long crimson bench, can remain quiet no longer. They spring to their feet, so different and yet one in eagerness. Hilda instantly reseats herself. None shall know how interested she is. None shall know how anxious, how filled with one hope. Shut your eyes then, Hilda. Hide your face, rippling with joy. Peter has beaten. "Peter van Hope, 1 mile!" calls the crier. The same buzz of excitement as before. While the judges take notes, the same throbbing of music through the din, but something is different. A little crowd presses close about some object near the column. Carl has fallen. He is not hurt, though somewhat stunned. If he were less sullen, he would find more sympathy in these warm young hearts. As it is, they forget him as soon as he is fairly on his feet again. The girls are to skate their 3rd mile. How resolute the little maidens look as they stand in a line. Some are solemn with a sense of responsibility. Some wear a smile half bashful, half provoked, but one air of determination pervades them all. This 3rd mile may decide the race. Still, if neither Gretel nor Hilda wins, there is yet a chance among the rest for the silver skates. Each girl feels sure that this time she will accomplish the distance in 1/2 of the time. How they stamp to try their runners! How nervously they examine each strap! How erect they stand at last, every eye upon Madame van Gleck! The bugle thrills through them again. With quivering eagerness they spring forward, bending, but in perfect balance. Each flashing stroke seems longer than the last. Now they are skimming off in the distance. Again the eager straining of eyes, again the shouts and cheering, again the thrill of excitement as, after a few moments, 4 or 5, in advance of the rest, come speeding back, nearer, nearer to the white columns. Who is first? Not Richie, Katrinka, Annie, nor Hilda, nor the girl in yellow, but Gretel. Gretel, the fleetest sprite of a girl that ever skated. She was but playing in the earlier races. Now she is in earnest, or rather, something within her has determined to win. That lithe little form makes no effort, but it cannot stop, not until the goal is passed. In vain the crier lifts his voice. He cannot be heard. He has no news to tell. It is already ringing through the crowd. Gretel has won the silver skates. Like a bird she has flown over the ice. Like a bird she looks about her in a timid, startled way. She longs to dart to the sheltered nook where her father and mother stand. But Hans is beside her. The girls are crowding round. Hilda's kind, joyous voice breathes in her ear. From that hour none will despise her. Goose girl or not, Gretel stands acknowledged Queen of the Skaters. With natural pride Hans turns to see if Peter van Holp is witnessing his sister's triumph. Peter is not looking toward them at all. He is kneeling, bending his troubled face low, and working hastily at his skate strap. Hans is beside him at once. "Are you in trouble, mynheer?" "Ah, Hans, is that you?" "Yes, my fun is over. I tried to tighten my strap, to make a new hole, and this botheration of a knife has cut it nearly in two." "Mynheer," said Hans, at the same time pulling off a skate, "you must use my strap." "Not I, indeed, Hans Brinker," cried Peter, looking up, "though I thank you warmly. Go to your post, my friend. The bugle will be sounding in another minute." "Mynheer," pleaded Hans in a husky voice, "you have called me your friend. Take the strap, quick! There is not an instant to lose. I shall not skate this time. Indeed, I am out of practice. Mynheer, you must take it." And Hans, blind and deaf to any remonstrance, slipped his strap into Peter's skate and implored him to put it on. "Come, Peter!" cried Lambert from the line. "We are waiting for you." "For madame's sake," pleaded Hans, "be quick. She is motioning to you to join the racers. There, the skate is almost on. Quick, mynheer, fasten it. I could not possibly win. The race lies between Master Schummel and yourself." "You are a noble fellow, Hans," cried Peter, yielding at last. He sprang to his post, just as the white handkerchief fell to the ground. The bugle sends forth its blast, loud, clear, and ringing. Off go the boys. "Mein Gott!" cries a tough old fellow from Delft. "They beat everything, these Amsterdam youngsters. See them!" See them indeed. They are winged Mercuries, every one of them. What mad errand are they on? Ah, I know. They are hunting Peter van Holp. He is some fleet-footed runaway from Olympus. Mercury and his troop of winged cousins are in full chase. They will catch him. Now Carl is the runaway. The pursuit grows furious. Ben is foremost. The chase turns in a cloud of mist. It is coming this way. Who is hunted now? Mercury himself. It is Peter, Peter van Holp. Fly, Peter. Hans is watching you. He is sending all his fleetness, all his strength into your feet. Your mother and sister are pale with eagerness. Hilda is trembling and dares not look up. Fly, Peter. The crowd has not gone deranged. It is only cheering. The pursuers are close upon you. Touch the white column. It beckons. It is reeling before you. It... Huzzah! Huzzah! Peter has won the silver skates. "Peter van Holp!" shouted the crier. But who heard him? "Peter van Holp!" shouted 100 voices, for he was the favorite boy of the place. Huzzah! Huzzah! Now the music was resolved to be heard. It struck up a lively air, then a tremendous march. The spectators, thinking something new was about to happen, deigned to listen and to look. The races formed in single file. Peter, being tallest, stood first. Gretel, the smallest of all, took her place at the end. Hans, who had borrowed a strap from the cake boy, was near the head. 3 gaily twined arches were placed at intervals upon the river facing the Van Gleck pavilion. Skating slowly and in perfect time to the music, the boys and girls moved forward, led on by Peter. It was beautiful to see the bright procession glide along like a living creature. It curved and doubled, and drew its graceful length in and out among the arches. Whichever way Peter, the head, went, the body was sure to follow. Sometimes it steered direct for the center arch, then, as if seized with a new impulse, turned away and curled itself about the first one, then unwound slowly and, bending low, with quick snake-like curvings, crossed the river, passing at length through the furthest arch. When the music was slow, the procession seemed to crawl like a thing afraid. It grew livelier, and the creature darted forward with a spring, gliding rapidly among the arches, in and out, curling, twisting, turning, never losing form until, at the shrill call of the bugle rising above the music, it suddenly resolved itself into boys and girls standing in a double semicircle before Madame van Gleck's pavilion. Peter and Gretel stand in the center in advance of the others. Madame van Gleck rises majestically. Gretel trembles, but feels that she must look at the beautiful lady. She cannot hear what is said, there is such a buzzing all around her. She is thinking that she ought to try and make a curtsy, such as her mother makes to the meester, when suddenly something so dazzling is placed in her hand that she gives a cry of joy. Then she ventures to look about her. Peter, too, has something in his hands. "Oh, oh, how splendid!" she cries, and "Oh, how splendid!" is echoed as far as people can see. Meantime the silver skates flash in the sunshine, throwing dashes of light upon those 2 happy faces. Mevrouw van Gend sends a little messenger with her bouquets, one for Hilda, one for Carl, and others for Peter and Gretel. At sight of the flowers, the queen of the skaters becomes uncontrollable. With a bright stare of gratitude, she gathers skates and bouquets in her apron, hugs them to her bosom, and darts off to search for her father and mother in the scattering crowd. End of chapter.
Chapter 45 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or the Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 45, Joy in the Cottage. Perhaps you were surprised to learn that Raff and his vrouw were at the skating race. You would have been more so had you been with them on the evening of that merry 20th of December. To see the Brinker cottage standing sulkily alone on the frozen marsh, with its bulgy, rheumatic-looking walls and its slouched hat of a roof pulled far over its eyes, one would never suspect that a lively scene was passing within. Without, nothing was left of the day but a low line of blaze at the horizon. A few venturesome clouds had already taken fire, and others, with their edges burning, were lost in the gathering smoke. A stray gleam of sunshine slipping down from the willow stump crept stealthily under the cottage. It seemed to feel that the inmates would give it welcome if it could only get near them. The room under which it hid was as clean could be. The very cracks in the rafters were polished. Delicious odors filled the air. A huge peat fire upon the hearth sent flashes of harmless lightning at the somber walls. It played in turn upon the great leather Bible, upon Gretel's closet bed, the household things upon their pegs, and the beautiful silver skates and the flowers upon the table. Dame Brinker's honest face shone and twinkled in the changing light. Gretel and Hans, with arms entwined, were leaning against the fireplace, laughing merrily, and Raff Brinker was dancing. I do not mean that he was pirouetting or cutting a pigeon wing, either of which would have been entirely too undignified for the father of a family. I simply affirm that while they were chatting pleasantly together, Raff suddenly sprang from his seat, snapped his fingers, and performed 2 or 3 flourishes very much like the climax of a Highland fling. Next he caught his vrouw in his arms and fairly lifted her from the ground in his delight. "Huzzah!" he cried. "I have it! I have it! It's Thomas Higgs. That's the name. It came upon me like a flash. Write it down, lad. Write it down." Someone knocked at the door. "It's the meester!" cried the delighted dame. "Goede gunst, how things come to pass!" Mother and children came in merry collision as they rushed to open the door. It was not the doctor after all, but 3 boys, Peter van Holp, Lambert, and Ben. "Good evening, young gentlemen," said Dame Brinker, so happy and proud that she would scarcely have been surprised at a visit from the king himself. "Good evening, Jufvrouw," said the trio, making magnificent bows. "Dear me," thought Dame Brinker as she bobbed up and down like a churn dasher, "it's lucky I learned to curtsy at Heidelberg." Raff was content to return the boys' salutations with a respectful nod. "Pray be seated, young masters," said the dame as Gretel bashfully thrust a stool at them. "There's a lack of chairs, as you see, but this one by the fire is at your service, and if you don't mind the hardness, that oak chest is as good a seat as the best. That's right, Hans, pull it out." By the time the boys were seated to the dame's satisfaction, Peter, acting as a spokesman, had explained that they were going to attend a lecture at Amsterdam, and had stopped on the way to return Hans's strap. "Oh, mynheer," cried Hans earnestly, "it is too much trouble. I am very sorry." "No trouble at all, Hans. I could have waited for you to come to your work tomorrow had I not wished to call. And Hans, talking of your work, my father is much pleased with it. A carver by trade could not have done it better. He would like to have the south arbor ornamented also, but I told him you were going to school again." "Aye," put in Raff Brinker emphatically. "Hans must go to school at once, and Gretel as well. That is true." "I am glad to hear you say so," responded Peter, turning toward the father, "and very glad to know that you are again a well man." "Yes, young master, a well man, and able to work as steady as ever, thank God." Here Hans hastily wrote something on the edge of a time-worn almanac that hung by the chimney-place. "Aye, that's right, lad, set it down. Figs, wigs, alack, alack!" cried Raff in great dismay. "It's gone again." "All right, father," said Hans. "The name's down now in black and white. Here, look at it, father. Mayhap the rest will come to you. If we had the place as well, it would be complete." Then, turning to Peter, he said in a low tone, "I have an important errand in town, mynheer, and if—" "Whist!" exclaimed the dame, lifting her hands. "Not to Amsterdam tonight, and you've owned your legs were aching under you. Nay, nay, it'll be soon enough to go at early daylight." "Daylight indeed," echoed Raff. "That would never do. Nay, Meitje, he must go this hour." The vrouw looked for an instant as if Raff's recovery was becoming rather a doubtful benefit. Her word was no longer sole law in the house. Fortunately, the proverb, "Humble wife is husband's boss," had taken deep root in her mind. Even as the dame pondered, it bloomed. "Very well, Raff," she said smilingly. "It is thy boy as well as mine. Ah, I've a troublesome house, young masters." Just then Peter drew a long strap from his pocket. Handing it to Hans, he said in an undertone, "I need not thank you for lending me this, Hans Brinker. Such boys as you do not ask for thanks. but I must say you did me a great kindness, and I am proud to acknowledge it."
"I did not know," he added laughingly, "until fairly in the race how anxious I was to win."
Hans was glad to join in Peter's laugh. It covered his embarrassment and gave his face a chance to cool off a little. Honest, generous boys like Hans have such a stupid way of blushing when you least expect it.
"It was nothing, mynheer," said the dame, hastening to her son's relief. "The lad's whole soul was in having you win the race. I know it was." This helped matters beautifully. "Ah, mynheer," Hans hurried to say, "from the first start I felt stiff and strange on my feet. I was well out of it so long as I had no chance of winning." Peter looked rather distressed. "We may hold different opinions here. That part of the business troubles me. It is too late to mend it now, but it would be really a kindness to me if—" The rest of Peter's speech was uttered so confidentially that I cannot record it. Enough to say, Hans soon started back in dismay, and Peter, looking very much ashamed, stammered out something to the effect that he would keep them, since he won the race, but it was all wrong. Here Van Monen coughed, as if to remind Peter that lecture hour was approaching fast. At the same moment Ben laid something upon the table. "Ah!" exclaimed Peter, "I forgot my other errand. Your sister ran off so quickly today that Madame van Gleck had no opportunity to give her the case for her skates." "Sh!" said Dame Brinker, shaking her head reproachfully at Gretel. "She was a very rude girl, I'm sure." Secretly she was thinking that very few women had such a fine little daughter. "No, indeed," Peter laughed. "She did exactly the right thing. Ran home with her richly won treasures. Who would not? Don't let us detain you, Hans," he continued, turning around as he spoke, but Hans, who was eagerly watching his father, seemed to have forgotten their presence. Meantime, Raff, lost in thought, was repeating under his breath, "Thomas Higgs, Thomas Higgs. Aye, that's the name. Alack, if I could but remember the place as well." The skate case was elegantly made of crimson morocco, ornamented with silver. If a fairy had designed its delicate tracery, they could not have been more daintily beautiful. "For the fleetest" was written upon the cover in sparkling letters. It was lined with velvet, and in one corner was stamped the name and address of the maker. Gretel thanked Peter in her own simple way, then, being quite delighted and confused, and not knowing what else to do, she lifted the case, carefully examining it in every part. "It's made by Mynheer Birmingham," she said after a while, still blushing and holding it before her eyes. "Birmingham," replied Lambert van Monen. "That's the name of a place in England. Let me see it." "Ha ha!" he laughed, holding the open case toward the firelight. "No wonder you thought so, but it's a slight mistake. The case was made at Birmingham, but the maker's name is in smaller letters. Humph! They're so small I can't read them." "Let me try," said Peter, leaning over his shoulder. "Why, man, it's perfectly distinct. It's it's T." "Well," said Lambert triumphantly, "if you can read it so easily, let's hear it. Th what?" Th. "Oh, why, Thomas Higgs, to be sure," replied Peter, pleased to be able to decipher it at last. Then, feeling that they had been acting rather unceremoniously, he turned to Hans. Peter turned pale. What was the matter with the people? Raff and Hans had started up and were staring at him in glad amazement. Gretel looked wild. Dame Brinker, with an unlighted candle in her hand, was rushing about the room, crying, "Hans, Hans, where's your hat? Oh, the meester! Oh, the meester!" "Birmingham, Higgs!" exclaimed Hans. "Did you say Higgs? We've found him. I must be off." "You see, young masters," the dame was panting, at the same time snatching Hans's hat from the bed. "You see, we know him. He's our... no, he isn't. I mean... Oh, Hans, you must go to Amsterdam this minute." "Good night, mynheers," panted Hans, radiant with sudden joy. "Good night. You will excuse me. I must go. Birmingham, Higgs, Higgs, Birmingham." And seizing his hat from his mother and his skates from Gretel, he rushed from the cottage. What could the boys think but that the whole Brinker family had suddenly gone crazy? They bade an embarrassed good evening and turned to go, but Raff stopped them. "This Thomas Higgs, young masters, is a person." "Ah!" exclaimed Peter, quite sure that Raff was the most crazy of all. "Yes, a person, a friend. We thought him dead. I hope it is the same man. In England, did you say?" "Yes, Birmingham," answered Peter. "It must be Birmingham in England."
"I know the man," said Ben, addressing Lambert. "His factory is not 4 miles from our place. A queer fellow, still as an oyster. Doesn't seem at all like an Englishman. I've often seen him. A solemn-looking chap with magnificent eyes. He made a beautiful writing case once for me to give Jenny on her birthday. Makes pocketbooks, telescope cases, and all kinds of leather work." As this was said in English, Van Monen of course translated it for the benefit of all concerned, noticing meanwhile that neither Raff nor his vrouw looked very miserable, although Raff was trembling and the dame's eyes were swimming with tears. You may believe that the doctor heard every word of the story, when later in the evening he came driving back with Hans. "The 3 young gentlemen have been gone some time," Dame Brinker said, "but like enough, by hurrying, it would be easy to find them coming out from the lecture, wherever that was." "True," said Raff, nodding his head. "The vrouw always hits upon the right thing. It would be well to see the young English gentleman, mynheer, before he forgets all about Thomas Higgs. It's a slippery name, do you see? One can't hold it safe a minute. It come upon me sudden and strong as a pile driver, and my boy wrote it down. Aye, mynheer, I'd haste to talk with the English lad. He's seen your son many a time, only to think on it." Dame Brinker took up the thread of the discourse. "You'll pick out the lad quick enough, mynheer, because he's in company with Peter van Holp, and his hair curls up over his forehead like foreign folks, and if you hear him speak he talks big and fast, only it's English, but that wouldn't be any hindrance to your honor." The doctor had already lifted his hat to go. With a beaming face he muttered something about it being just like the young scamp to give himself a rascally English name, called Hans "my son," thereby making that young gentleman as happy as a lord, and left the cottage with very little ceremony, considering what a great meester he was. The grumbling coachman comforted himself by speaking his mind as he drove back to Amsterdam. Since the doctor was safely stowed away in the coach and could not hear a word, it was a fine time to say terrible things of folks who hadn't no manner of feeling for nobody, and who were always wanting the horses a dozen times of a night. End of chapter. Chapter 46 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or the Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 46. The Mysterious Disappearance of Thomas Higgs. Higgs's factory was a mine of delight for the gossips of Birmingham. It was a small building, but quite large enough to hold a mystery. Who the proprietor was, or where he came from, none could tell. He looked like a gentleman, that was certain, though everybody knew he had risen from an apprenticeship, and he could handle his pen like a writing master.
Years ago he had suddenly appeared in the place, a lad of 18, learned his trade faithfully, and risen in the confidence of his employer, been taken in as a partner soon after the time was up. Finally, when old Willett died, had assumed the business on his own hands. This was all that was known of his affairs. It was a common remark among some of the good people that he never had a word to say to a Christian soul, while others declared that though he spoke beautifully when he chose to, there was something wrong in his accent. A tidy man, too, they called him, all but for having that scandalous green pond alongside of his factory, which wasn't deep enough for an eel and was just a fever nest as sure as you live. His nationality was a great puzzle. The English name spoke plain enough for one side of his house, but of what manner of nation was his mother? If she'd been an American, he'd certainly have had high cheekbones and reddish skin. If a German, he would have known the language, and Squire Smith declared that he didn't. If French, and his having that frog pond made it seem likely, it would come out in his speech. No, there was nothing he could be but Dutch. And, strangest of all, though the man always pricked up his ears when you talked of Holland, he didn't seem to know the first thing about the country when you put him to the point. Anyhow, as no letters ever came to him from his mother's family in Holland, and as nobody living had ever seen old Higgs, the family couldn't be anything much. Probably Thomas Higgs himself was no better than he should be, for all he pretended to carry himself so straight. And for their parts, the gossips declared, they were not going to trouble their heads about him. Consequently, Thomas Higgs and his affairs were never failing subjects of discussion. Picture, then, the consternation among all the good people when it was announced by somebody who was there and ought to know, that the post-boy had that very morning handed Higgs a foreign-looking letter, and the man had turned as white as the wall, rushed to his factory, talked a bit with one of the head workmen, and without bidding a creature good-bye, was off bag and baggage before you could wink, ma'am. Mistress Scrubbs, his landlady, was in deep affliction. The dear soul became quite out of breath while speaking of him. "To leave lodgings in that sudden way, without never so much as a day's warning, which was what every woman who didn't wish to be trodden under foot, which thank heaven wasn't her way, had a perfect right to expect. Yes, and a week's warning now you mention it, and without even so much as saying, 'Many thanks, Mistress Scrubbs, for all past kindnesses,' which were most numerous, though she said it who shouldn't say it. Leastwise she wasn't never no kind of person to be looking for thanks every minute. It was really scandalous, though to be sure Mr. Higgs paid up everything to the last farthing, and it fairly brought tears to my eyes to see his dear empty boots lying there in the corner of his room, which alone showed trouble of mind, for he always stood 'em up straight as soldiers, though being half sold twice they hadn't, of course, been worth taking away." Whereupon her dearest friend, Miss Scrumpkins, ran home to tell all about it, and as everybody knew the Scrumpkinses, a shining gossamer of news was soon woven from one end of the street to the other. An investigating committee met that evening at Mrs. Snigham's, sitting in secret session over her best china. Though invited only to a quiet tea, the amount of judicial business they transacted on the occasion was prodigious. The biscuits were actually cold before the committee had a chance to eat anything. There was so much to talk over, and it was so important that it should be firmly established that each member had always been certain sure that something extraordinary would be happening to that man yet, and that it was nearly 8 o'clock before Mrs. Snigham gave anybody a second cup. End of chapter. Chapter 47 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or The Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 47, Broad Sunshine. One snowy day in January, Lawrence Bookman went with his father to pay his respects to the Brinker family. Raff was resting after the labors of the day. Gretel, having filled and lighted his pipe, was brushing every speck of ash from the hearth. The dame was spinning, and Hans, perched upon a stool by the window, was diligently studying his lessons. It was a peaceful, happy household whose main excitement during the past week had been the looking forward to this possible visit from Thomas Higgs. As soon as the grand presentation was over, Dame Brinker insisted upon giving her guests some hot tea. It was enough to freeze anyone, she said, to be out in such crazy, blustering weather. While they were talking with her husband, she whispered to Gretel that the young gentleman's eyes and her boy's were certainly as much alike as four beans, to say nothing of a way they both had of looking as if they were stupid, and yet knew as much as a body's grandfather. Gretel was disappointed. She had looked forward to a tragic scene, such as Annie Bowman had often described to her from storybooks, and here was the gentleman who came so near being a murderer, who for 10 years had been wandering over the face of the earth, who believed himself deserted and scorned by his father, the very young gentleman who had fled from his country in such magnificent trouble, sitting by the fire just as pleasant and natural as could be. To be sure, his voice had trembled when he talked with her parents, and he had met his father's look with a bright kind of smile that would have suited a dragon killer bringing the waters of perpetual youth to his king. But after all, he wasn't at all like the conquered hero in Annie's book. He did not say, lifting his arm toward heaven, "I hereby swear to be forever faithful to my home, my God, and my country," which would have been only right and proper under the circumstances. All things considered, Gretel was disappointed. Raff, however, was perfectly satisfied. The message was delivered. Dr. Bookman had his son safe and sound, and the poor lad had done nothing sinful after all, except in thinking that his father would have abandoned him for an accident. To be sure, the graceful stripling had become rather a heavy man. Raff had unconsciously hoped to clasp that same boyish hand again, but all things were changed to Raff, for that matter. So he pushed back every feeling but joy as he saw father and son sitting side by side at his hearthstone. Meantime, Hans was wholly occupied in the thought of Thomas Higgs's happiness in being able to be the meester's assistant again, and Dame Brinker was sighing softly to herself, wishing that the lad's mother were alive to see him, such a fine young gentleman as he was, and wondering how Dr. Bookman could bear to see the silver watch getting so dull. He had worn it ever since Raff handed it over, that was evident. What had he done with the gold one he used to wear? The light was shining full upon Dr. Bookman's face. How contented he looked! How much younger and brighter than formerly! The hard lines were quite melting away. He was laughing as he said to the father, "Am I not a happy man, Raff Brinker? My son will sell out his factory this month, and open a warehouse in Amsterdam. I shall have all my spectacle cases for nothing." Hans started from his reverie. "A warehouse, mynheer? And will Thomas Higgs, is your son, not to be your assistant again?" A shade passed over the meester's face, but he brightened with an effort as he replied, "Oh no, Lawrence has had quite enough of that. He wishes to be a merchant." Hans appeared so surprised and disappointed that his friend asked good-naturedly, "Why so silent, boy? Is it any disgrace to be a merchant?" Not a disgrace, mynheer," stammered Hans, "but—" "But what?"
"Why, the other calling is so much better," answered Hans. "So much nobler. I think, mynheer," he added with enthusiasm, that to be a surgeon, to cure the sick and crippled, to save human life, to be able to do what you have done for my father, is the grandest thing on earth." The doctor was regarding him sternly. Hans felt rebuked. His cheeks were flushed. Hot tears were gathering under his lashes. "It is an ugly business, boy, this surgery," said the doctor, still frowning at Hans. "It requires great patience, self-denial, and perseverance." "I am sure that it does," cried Hans. "It calls for wisdom, too, and a reverence for God's work. Ah, mynheer, it may have its trials and drawbacks, but you do not mean what you say. It is great and noble, not ugly. Pardon me, mynheer. It is not for me to speak so boldly." Dr. Boekman was evidently displeased. He turned his back on the boy, and conferred aside with Laurens. Meanwhile the dame scowled a terrible warning at Hans. These great people, she knew well enough, never liked to hear poor folk speak up so pertly. The meester turned around. "How old are you, Hans Brinker?" 15, mynheer," was the startled reply. "Would you like to become a physician?" "Yes, mynheer," answered Hans, quivering with excitement. "Would you be willing, with your parents' consent, to devote yourself to study, to go to the university, and in time be a student in my office?" "Yes, mynheer." "You would not grow restless, think you, and change your mind just as I had set my heart upon preparing you to be my successor?" Hans's eyes flashed. "No, mynheer, I would not change." "You may believe him there," cried the dame, who could remain quiet no longer. "Hans is like a rock when once he decides. And as for study, mynheer, the child has almost grown fast to his books of late. He can jumble off Latin already, like any priest." The doctor smiled. "Well, Hans, I see nothing to prevent us from carrying out this plan, if your father agrees." "Ahem," said Raff, too proud of his boy to be very meek. "The fact is, mynheer, I prefer an active out-of-door life myself. But if the lad's inclined to study for a meester, and he'd have the benefit of your good word to push him on in the world, it's all one to me. The money's all that's wanting, but it mightn't be long with too strong pair of arms to earn it before we—" "Tut, tut," interrupted the doctor. "If I take your right-hand man away, I must pay the cost, and glad enough will I be to do it. It will be like having two sons, eh, Laurens? One a merchant and the other a surgeon. I shall be the happiest man in Holland. Come to me in the morning, Hans, and we will arrange matters at once." Hans bowed assent. He dared not trust himself to speak. "And Brinker," continued the doctor, "my son Laurens will need a trusty, ready man like you when he opens his warehouse in Amsterdam. Someone to oversee matters, and see that the lazy clowns round about the place do their duty. Someone to— Oh, why don't you tell him yourself, you rascal?" This last was addressed to the son, and did not sound half as fierce as it looks in print. The rascal and Raff soon understood each other perfectly. "I'm loath to leave the dikes," said the latter after they had talked together a while. "But it is such a good offer, mynheer. I'd be robbing my family if I let it go past me." Take a long look at Hans, as he sits there staring gratefully at the meester, for you shall not see him again for many years. And Gretel, ah, what a vista of puzzling work suddenly opens before her! Yes, for dear Hans's sake she will study now. If he really is to be a meester, his sister must not shame his greatness. How faithfully those glancing eyes shall yet seek for the jewels that lie hidden in rocky schoolbooks, and how they shall yet brighten and droop at the coming of one whom she knows of now only as the boy who wore a red cap on that wonderful day when she found the silver skates in her apron. But the doctor and Laurens are going. Dame Brinker is making her best curtsy.
Raff stands beside her, looking every inch a man as he grasps the meester's hand. Through the open cottage door we can look out upon the level Dutch landscape, all alive with the falling snow. End of chapter. Chapter 48 of Hans Brinker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Hans Brinker, or the Silver Skates, by Mary Mapes Dodge. Chapter 48. Conclusion. Our story is nearly told. Time passes in Holland just as surely and steadily as here. In that respect, no country is odd. To the Brinker family it has brought great changes. Hans has spent the years faithfully and profitably, conquering obstacles as they arose and pursuing one object with all the energy of his nature. If often the way has been rugged, his resolution has never failed. Sometimes he echoes, with his good friend, the words said long ago in that little cottage near Broek. Surgery is an ugly business, but always in his heart of hearts lingers the echo of those truer words. It is great and noble, it awakes a reverence for God's work. Were you in Amsterdam today, you might see the famous Dr. Brinker riding in his grand coach to visit his patients. Or, it might be, you would see him skating with his own boys and girls upon the frozen canal. For Annie Bowman, the beautiful, frank-hearted peasant girl, you would inquire in vain. But Annie Brinker, the vrouw of the great physician, is very like her. Only, as Hans says, she is even lovelier, wiser, more like a fairy godmother than ever. Peter van Holp also is a married man. I could have told you before that he and Hilda would join hands and glide through life together, just as years ago they skimmed side by side over the frozen sunlit river. At one time I came near hinting that Katrinka and Karl would join hands. It is fortunate that the report was not started, for Katrinka changed her mind and is single to this day. The lady is not quite so merry as formerly, and, I grieve to say, some of the tinkling bells are out of tune. But she is the life of her social circle still. I wish she would be in earnest, just for a little while, but no, it is not in her nature. Her cares and sorrows do nothing more than disturb the tinkling. They never waken any deeper music. Richie's soul has been stirred to its depths during these long years. Her history would tell how seed carelessly sown is sometimes reaped in anguish, and how a golden harvest may follow a painful planting. If I mistake not, you may be able to read the written record before long, that is, if you are familiar with the Dutch language, in the witty but earnest author whose words are welcome to this day in thousands of Holland homes. Few could recognize the haughty, flippant Richie who scoffed at little Gretel. Lambert van Monen and Ludwig van Holp are good Christian men, and, what is more easily to be seen at a glance, thriving citizens. Both are dwellers in Amsterdam, but one clings to the old city of that name, and the other is a pilgrim to the new. Van Monen's present home is not far from Central Park, and he says, if the New Yorkers do their duty, the park will in time equal his beautiful Bosch near the Hague. He often thinks of the Katrinka of his boyhood, but he is glad now that Katrinka, the woman, sent him away, though it seemed at the time his darkest hour. Ben's sister Jenny has made him very happy, happier than he could have been with anyone else in the wide world. Karl Schummel has had a hard life. His father met with reverses in business, and as Karl had not many warm friends, and above all was not sustained by noble principles, he has been tossed about by fortune's battledore, until his gayest feathers are nearly all knocked off. He is a bookkeeper in the thriving Amsterdam house of Boekman and Schimmelpenninck. Voostenwalbert, the junior partner, treats him kindly, and he in turn is very respectful to the monkey with a long name for a tail. Of all our group of Holland friends, Jacob Poot is the only one who has passed away. Good-natured, true-hearted, and unselfish to the last, he is mourned now as heartily as he was loved and laughed at while on earth. He grew to be very thin before he died, thinner than Benjamin Dobbs, who is now portliest among the portly. Raff Brinker and his vrouw have been living comfortably in Amsterdam for many years, a faithful, happy pair, as simple and straightforward in their good fortune as they were patient and trustful in darker days. They have a zomerhuis near the old cottage, and thither they often repair with their children and grandchildren on the pleasant summer afternoons when the pond lilies rear their queenly heads above the water. The story of Hans Brinker would be but half told if we did not leave him with Gretel standing near. Dear, quick, patient little Gretel. What is she now? Ask old Dr. Boekman. He will declare that she is the finest singer, the loveliest woman in Amsterdam. Ask Hans and Annie, and they will assure you that she is the dearest sister ever known. Ask her husband. He will tell you that she is the brightest, sweetest little wife in Holland. Ask Dame Brinker and Raff. Their eyes will glisten with joyous tears. Ask the poor, and the air will be filled with blessings. But, lest you forget a tiny form trembling and sobbing on the mound before the Brinker cottage, ask the Van Glecks. They will never weary of telling of the darling little girl who won the silver skates. End of chapter, end of book. Thank you for listening.